Before the success stories, the progress, there was you. You who made a choice to grow, to inspire, to overcome your own challenges. At NASM, we're in service of your limitless potential, because when you keep growing, we all get stronger, and we'll never stop making your journey our mission. Join the fitness leader. Become a fitness leader. Become a certified personal trainer.
You're listening to the NASM-CPT Podcast with Richey, winner of the Share Care Emmy Award for Social Storytelling and the official podcast of the National Academy of Sports Medicine.
Hey, y'all, and welcome to the NASM-CPT Podcast. My name is Richey, and today I've got a special guest, and I think something important about today's episode is that we're going to look for clarity with questions around corrective exercise. I think there are some things missing when it comes to corrective exercise, and I had this conversation with a guest that I have today, and it kind of came up. I wouldn't say out of the blue. It came up because of an article that was written, and he and I met at a conference, and we started talking about corrective exercise. And there are some holes in what is being done by so many people that have the NASM corrective exercise specialist credential, and we want to kind of have a conversation about it. Now, there are things that this gentleman and I disagree on fundamentally. And there are about 90% of the things that we agree on across the board. And yet what a lot of people do is they find the 5%, the 10%, the 1% there's potential disagreement. And they really go, oh, what about this? What about this? What do you think about what they said? And so what I want to do today is have a conversation with a friend who has some different ideas and different concepts, presumably, than what we may have. And let's have a conversation. I think what the interesting thing about this is that as we started talking, we realized how much we had in common. And the common ground is vital as we go through discourse and have conversations about some of the stuff that we're not 100% aligned on. But the fact of the matter is that he's right in so many of the things that he is addressing that we need to make a consideration with on our end. And so I want to introduce our guest today. He's a friend of mine. We've met and at conferences and spent many, many, many hours at coffee shops and hanging out and discussing and pontificating. So welcome to the podcast, my friend, educator, fitness phenom, Nick Tumminello. What's going on, Nick?
Hey, man, I appreciate the intro. Checks in the mail for that one.
Yeah, man. Well, listen, man, it is good to see you. And I guess the last time I saw you was 2022 November when we were in Bangkok. I think that's right.
Yeah, man. And I know people listening, they're kind of, want to get into it like, hey, man, what's in it for me? My time is limited. Probably listening on 1.5 times speed. So I figure we just dive right into this. But I will say that you're a lot of people we wrote a paper called Corrective Exercise Trap. I'm just going to be the quick intro so we can get right into this and people can get the vibe. And it was published in the NSCA Personal Trainer Quarterly. It's a peer-reviewed journal. It's the most read peer-reviewed journal the NSCA has. And I wrote it with a physical therapist who's second right now in the Army in regards to like the highest physical therapist level in the Army. So he's no joke. His name's Jason Silvernail. And then also an educator who specializes in motor control aspect and also aspects of rehabilitation named Ben Cormack. So we challenged a lot of aspects of movement screens, posture assessments, and then connecting those with by the way, this is all research-based. It wasn't just us pontificating our opinions. And we shared the other side of a lot of research that challenges some of these direct assumptions that we make, saying, well, if someone moves this way, this means they're more likely to have pain or get pain down the road or get injured or have less performance. And of course, what happens is, just like in politics, the truth is somewhere in the middle. But you have people who get on this side who go, corrective exercise sucks, and they all thought I was on that side. And I said, no, not necessarily. But then you have the people who are like, well, all I know is it works for me, and it helps me with my clients, and it's great. And it seemed like, so whatever you and your science, all I know is what works for me, and it becomes this really polarized thing, and no real productive discussion happens, which we're going to have. And you were the first person I would say, coming from NASM, because a lot of people that were associated with, like, oh, what are you saying? You're smarter than the NASM book, which we weren't saying. But, you get these very adversarial type, because people identify this way. And you were the first person to go, yeah, and you were there speaking, as you work with NASM at a high level. Yeah. And you said, man, I really appreciated that paper. It's definitely something that we could, update. And I was like, man, I really respect that. And he gets it. He's not taking it personally, and this is what we do. It's not who we are. So I think, with that, if you let me, I'll follow your lead. You let me know if you want me to sort of go into some of the challenges and what it means practically. How can we all be better trainers and give our clients a better service? That really is what it's all about. And I want to make this as practically relevant to the listeners as possible.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Nick. And so listen, y'all, here's the thing. There's going to be, we've studied, we've researched, we apply, we have what we make application with in the gym. Now, some of you listening aren't corrective exercise specialists with NASM, or you may be through NASM or another company. And I think really where some of the issues come into play are not that you're implementing corrective exercise. Is a lot of times it's corrective exercise is the home base, and it's oftentimes not left, where that's really where you and I started meeting a lot in the middle and saying, okay, well, I agree that you can't just do corrective exercise and only do corrective exercise. Correctives, the idea of even having something that can be corrected is that it can be corrected. And so if you're doing corrective exercise all the time and we're not getting anywhere, then what is the point of this corrective exercise? The goal is to try to accomplish something. Now, the question is, what are we trying to accomplish? And I think that's going to go back to a conversation that we had for a few hours at a coffee shop in Bangkok, and then in the conference that I met you first, and I don't remember where that was, maybe Virginia, where we first initially had this conversation. There's no way that I can feasibly or reasonably be opposed to evidence, right? So that's never where I'm coming. So you guys have put together a pretty good evidence-based concept. And I think what we're looking at here is trying to balance out what evidences are out there, and then trying to also figure out what is the purpose of doing what it is that we're doing. And Nick, I'm going to throw this to you right now, is that a lot of people that you see that talk about corrective exercise, let me rephrase. So in the form of a question, when you are presented with this idea of corrective exercise, what is it that you are seeing that makes you kind of get a little prickly on the hairs in the back of your neck and go, I don't really know about that?
I appreciate it, man. So obviously this is a big discussion, which is why we're doing this. So let me get to the heart of this first, because sometimes when you don't tell people what your intentions are, they want to put it to you. Oh, you just want to challenge this, or, you're for this or against this and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So here's really the thrust of it. And this may be where I differ and from you or whatnot, but I think it's not that corrective exercise doesn't work, or it's nonsense, or that the NASM book is wrong, or other people that teach corrective exercise in these various 3- and 4-letter acronym certifications, right? There's a million of those, and I'll make some comments on that in a second. I'm not here to throw shade on anything. But it's that we have devalued the therapeutic benefit of good, correct exercise, meaning good form, good programming. You know, if someone's a little stronger on their right side and a little weaker on their left, give them a few more sets on their weaker side than they do on the stronger side. You know, some basic things. If someone's, you know, a little rounded, you know, but they say, oh, every time I do Y's and T's, I feel it on my neck and traps. Well, hey, have you just tried getting them really strong and coaching up really good rows so their scapulas go back? Because that really does strengthen your rhomboids and mid traps as well, too. And it gets the lats and and their biceps a little bit as secondary pulling muscles. So I would say if I pull back to the largest aspect of this, I would say my biggest concern or the missing corrective exercise is just good programming. And it's too simple to be sexy, right? So, and us trainers, I think I'm going to be a little bit funny, but also, you know, there's some truth in joking. You know, every trainer I think is insecure about just being a trainer, that they want to show we're more than a trainer. And I love the mindset of the corrective.
That's right.
Because it means that I'm paying attention more to detail than just the trainer who shows you how to use the machines and watches form and reads Arnold's Encyclopedia Bodybuilding. I want more than that for you. I can give more than that for you. The problem is sometimes we lose our direction and we forget that people come to us to get in better shape and get a great workout and have a good experience. You can't make people love training, but you can make them hate it. And when they come to us and they,
that is a beautiful statement. Thank you.
Thank you. So I know I'm saying a lot here, but if I come to a trainer and, you know, I say, look, I want to get bigger arms and chest and nicer glutes. And you go, yeah, but first we got to look at your huge lordotic curve and your hips are tight and this, that, and the other. And then after a few sessions, I go, you know, I haven't really sniffed a bicep curl here. Yeah, and some of this other is philosophy. Oh, I train movements, not muscles, and you're doing med ball chops and all this 3D stuff. That client's going to say, I know I'm not a trainer, but this doesn't feel right to me. This feels more like physical therapy. It's boring. I haven't got a bicep burn, but I know my neighbor's doing that group training class or with so-and-so other trainer, and they're loving it, and they're getting their butt kicked. So they're going to go to that. So sometimes we forget because we're so passionate about what we believe works for people that we lose our way. So anyway, I said all that to say this. My biggest concern is that we are personal trainers, number one, or small group training, whatever, group X. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I find that we make the session more about the assessment and not enough actual fitness and conditioning gets done to get the beneficial results that the client actually wants. Okay, now you can come back and say, not you, just the general you, say, well, training is a combination of what people want and what people need. Great. My argument is that try good programming first before you find all these things that you try to find every which way that people are broken, and then do all these smaller time corrective exercises with them, because they will make people feel better. They will increase mobility. But sometimes the reason why they have those issues is because they're sedentary, they sit too much, and they haven't had a very versatile group of activities. So I always say, have you just tried lunges and squats before you try, band adductions or whatever, right? So I think sometimes we go sexy before we do simple. And a lot of the things that corrective exercise is designed to address, which it does, can often get taken care of with good programming first. And usually what you find, and this will be my last little soapbox here because I'm trying to cover a lot, is that it actually becomes your first assessment. So after about 12 weeks or so, it's an arbitrary number, but it's enough time to get people in a program, to get their schedule twice or three times a week on a regular basis, and make some adaptions. Sometimes some of those little aches and pains that they have, or sometimes those little form issues that they've had that you're always coaching them on, go away. And you go, I didn't need to do all these special things. So not only did I fix some of their imbalances or dysfunctions, or however you want to call that. I know some of my other colleagues who are further against the corrective stuff than I am. They would have problems with those terms. But whatever you want to call it, a lot of those things are taken care of while you got them the muscle that they wanted and the enjoyment, if you just coach it really well. So I would say that's my biggest concern, is really from a client perspective, is that I think trainers jump to correctives too quick by undervaluing really good programming and exercise. Therefore, the client themselves loses out because they may not enjoy the session as much. And secondly, they may not be getting as much bang for their buck because you may be able to fix those things and get them nicer looking buns and arms at the same time.
All right. Hey, Nick. All right. So first of all, ladies and gentlemen, this is the NASM-CPT podcast, and this is my guest, Nick Tumminello. And what I want to do right now is just address one of the things that Nick said, which was, you go into a corrective exercise, and the moment you see something is corrective, and you get to the point where maybe they don't even enjoy working out probably because you haven't worked out yet. That you're spending all this time doing correctives. And the reason I want to speak to that is I feel like Nick is kind of me calling out myself from like 2006, 2007, where I was deeply entrenched in corrective exercise. I really enjoyed it. I got a lot of good business from doing it, but I, people coming in with hitch and the giddy ups, and I'm able to help them out. And I did. I helped a lot of people, but I also failed a lot of people by focusing so much on correctives that I did not present myself as a personal trainer, which is what they came to me for. And that is exactly what Nick is speaking to. And I'll give you an example. One example in particular, I remember because I feel guilty to this day for this experience, right? So Nick, I had an older gentleman. I think he was 76 years old. And he came to me and he goes, I want to learn how to use some of the gym equipment, because I want to come to the gym and I'll get into the gym equipment and I want to be able to learn how to do these exercises so that I can do them on my own. And I said, you are in terrible shape. I mean, not exactly, but this is the gist of it. You're in terrible shape. I need to focus on your stability. I want to help you more with your balance. I want to help you more with your core stability. I want to help you gain some of your flexibility back and to be able to stand without losing balance. And so I did every single thing that he didn't ask for. And I'm not sure I did a single thing that he actually requested. Now, if you go and look at the research, you will find that sometimes just getting stronger is very beneficial to helping older populations with their balance. Mm-hmm. But I decided that my way of doing it was better than his request. And my way of doing it was also better than another way that is proven to be successful, because I wanted to take this entire continuum and model and spend hour after hour, the amount of sessions that he purchased, and do all of these exercises with him. And at the end of it, he did not re-up. And I'm pretty sure that he probably found either another personal trainer that could do what he requested, or that he has decided that all personal trainers are awful because none of them do what you ask them to do. And that is a client and a case that I think about regularly, because I was so focused on doing the corrective exercise continuum, to do the flexibility continuum, to do a model that I presented, and then leaving the art of what we do to the side, which is balancing what people want, balancing what they need, and balancing a very specific request that I did not meet for that particular person. So I lay myself vulnerable in front of the judgment of many people with this particular story, because I think it kind of exemplifies the conversation that we're actually trying to have right now.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate your self-reflectiveness. But on the other side of it, I'm sure you had other clients that thought you were their body guru, because you helped them, they helped them feel better, and that's sort of what keeps this stuff going, right? So where you just go, well, I'm helping other people, I'm not going to focus on the one or two people that I failed. You're going to have that. The more people you work with, not everybody's going to get the glaring results. So before I'm going to talk about some research. I'm not going to make this science nerdy. I am not a science nerd. I can talk science nerdy, but I'm a trainer at first. So I always try to tie things back. But I know some people science is just not very compelling to them. They think it's behind, trainers are ahead of research and all this stuff. I don't want to get into all that stuff. But so I'll speak to both ends. Some people look at this and go, "Oh, tell me about the research." So I'm gonna cover both aspects of things. So one of the big, and I'm gonna get into some direct challenges as well here, but I'm trying to just create the bigger picture. What does this mean? What to do about it? So let me say this first. My main message is, from these direct challenges I'm going to make to some of the things that, NASM may teach, or the common beliefs we have in the field, is don't stop doing your assessments. And I'm not saying any of these corrective exercises are bad or a waste of time. What I would say is, at least again, this is for me, is instead of looking for what they can't do in the beginning, which is basically what an assessment is trying to figure out in which ways you're in their flaws, whether you do a posture assessment, a movement assessment, some combination of the two. That's what it really is. You're just looking for problems. You're looking for dysfunctions that you can address. Instead of focusing on that in the beginning, focus on what they can do, meaning how to work around their aches and pains and how to get them to do pushing and pulling exercises and knee bending and hip hinging exercises and rotation, anti-rotation with good control, means good form, and without pain. That's step one. Then, after about 12 or 14 weeks of doing that, understand programming, don't have too much redundant exercises. Make sure you give them a variety of when I say variety, I don't mean change it up on a random basis. What I mean is that most people do the exact same workout routine they've been doing for 20 years, or they don't do it, or the same activities, right? They sit at the desk, they carry their groceries, and they pick up their kitty cat, right? That's it. There's some of them, but sedentary people. So what I mean is that you need to get them pushing things and pulling things in different directions, moving their body in ways they're not getting on a regular basis. So as long as you follow those two C's, comfort and control, control's form, comfort is without pain, and do that for about 12 to 14 weeks, whatever you don't think has been taken care of, then fixed, now is your time to go, maybe I need to be a little bit more of a laser beam. And guess what that laser beam is? Corrective exercise. The stuff that NASM has done a great job teaching. Maybe I need to assess that hip a little bit. Maybe I can find that this is weak or this is over at whatever terms you use, right? But I think that's my issue, is some trainers jump too quickly to those things. The other thing is again, I'm going to challenge correctives, but I understand that I'm not the only trainer. Other trainers have different approaches to things. I try to make practical suggestions. If you do find something that you think needs extra work, let's say you think that thoracic needs more mobility, right? Needs more extension and rotation. A lot of trainers just do that in the warm-up, right? That's the big thing nowadays, right? Back when you and I came up, it was called that dynamic warm-up was the big thing. Now it's mobility, right? So great. Same stuff, just different package. That's what we do in generations, right? We do the same thing. We just call it something different. Fine. So here's the thing. We might do one set of thoracic mobility and then something for the hips and something for the ankles and some core activation and glute activation if you're into all that. Do you really think just doing one set and a warm-up, if it's something that they need versus just sort of a general, overall mobility thing, is going to do that much good? My suggestion there is, if you think it's actually corrective, meaning you say this person needs this, do it as active recovery in between sets of lower body. So my rule is, if I'm going to do a specific, more directed corrective for upper body, I'll pair that or triset that with another exercise for lower body. And then that's the flip. So if I'm doing an upper body exercise, I'll do lower body mobility. Now, if you're my client and I feel that you have a thoracic limitation and I have you doing 3 sets of lunges, in between every set, you're doing thoracic mobility. So you're doing 3 times as much work as the other trainer who's just doing a warm-up on occasion. Who do you think is actually going to get better results in regards from a corrective standpoint if that area needs more mobilization? So that's another thing I have. So I want to talk, I'm trying to provide the practical relevance to this before I start actually making direct challenges, because I don't want people to think that the interpretation is I'm saying that the NASM book is wrong, or you saying what I'm doing is crap, that kind of stuff, because that's not the impression I want. I just don't want people to think that it's the end all be all, and to forget that we still can get great results without going down a rabbit hole of the corrective exercise trap, where it's constant mobility and activation and very little strength and conditioning gets done.
Right. So let me speak to that for a moment. And I'm going to speak to that from my perspective and from the NASM stance, which in so many ways, we don't disagree with what you said. Now, I do like the idea of doing a little something to start off with, kind of like a primer exercise for a muscle where your statement was, do you really think that's enough? And the answer is no. I think that what it is kind of like when we do core stabilization exercises going into something that we're just kind of, let's slap it around, shake it awake. Let's stimulate the muscle a little bit to get it going so that it knows, hey bud, you're on deck. You're on deck. You're in the batter's box, and you're about to go forward and start swinging at some pitches. And so we're waking some muscles up. That's not a technical term, but we're priming them, we're prepping them and getting ready. But is it over there? And I don't think it necessarily is. And that's where I like a lot what you said. If I've got somebody maybe with some rounded shoulders or somebody that's got a lot of valgus going on when they squat, I'm going to do some prep prior to their lift, but also in between their lifts, and also maybe during their lifts, while we are really focusing on comfort and we're focusing on their form, right? So we're making sure that what was that? You said comfort and something else.
And control.
Control. Thank you. I was like, it felt really good the way you said it. So comfort and control. And in that control, there is kind of the underutilized word that I think we need to discuss, which also starts with a C. And it's not corrective, and I think correctives are great, but this C word is a very good corrective, and it is called cueing. And sometimes, and I see it a lot, Nick, is that we get people that don't do necessarily a very good job cueing. They do a lot of correctives, and they spend a lot of time doing correctives. And then if all you really needed to do was cue somebody, then that's not a corrective issue. That's a technique issue. That's a form issue. That's a cueing issue. It's not a corrective issue. And so if you can address something via cueing and that creates resolution, then the foam rolling and the stretching and the activations and the mobility and all the other things that are going into your the answer to your assessment. If the answer to your assessment was not initially, can I cue you and you be able to do it better? And you lay out this kind of 15 to 60 minute corrective exercise strategy when all you had to do was say, hey, don't let your knees knock when you squat, then you've really done not just your clients a disservice, but you're really doing yourself a disservice as a corrective exercise specialist, because it's kind of like a website guy I had one time. It's like he went in there and developed this website, and a year later I went back to get it done by somebody who really knew what they were doing. And he was like, there's so many things on the back end here that were put in, and it's like busy work, and it's a practice in experimental art just to see if he could do something, to see if it worked. And maybe it did, but it was superfluous. There was a lot that went into it that was unnecessary. And so when we create these extraneous circumstances, then that's on us. And then we leave our clients thinking, I didn't necessarily get a workout. Now, they might still be like, I love it. I think it was great. You're doing me a great service. But that is their interpretation of something based off of somebody that's paying attention to them, somebody that's guiding them, somebody that's leading them and supporting them, which is probably something that they need, but it doesn't mean that they needed all of those correctives when a cue could have sufficed. So, shout out to people like Nick Winkleman, who have this kind of wonderful way of creating cueing and doing cueing. And he helped us out with some of our content when it comes to, I think he's helped us out a lot in our performance enhancement specialist course. I think we should probably start implementing a lot of that into our correctives as well.
I love it. Well said. Nick's work is awesome. So I'll just quickly add to that, and then we'll keep the ball rolling here. So
Perfect.
yeah, I think that's a flaw. I'm not going to speak for what NASM teaches, and you can tell me about that. But I know other screens and things have said that they say don't coach people, just show them what to do, because you want to see what they do automatically. And they see that reveals the truth. And I have a problem with that. I go, well, you need to, sometimes people just don't know what you want. They've never done the squat before. They don't know what we consider a good squat. So I always say you want to separate a lack of awareness from a lack of ability. Right. And that's what you're saying. That. So I'm going to cue you, whether it's an overhead squat or you don't like that and you do a regular squat, whatever. Just say, hey, can you do this with your knees, pushing this way instead of that way? See how your knees are going in? We'll push them this way, or keep them over your toe, whatever your cues, you think are important. And then they go, oh, like this. And you go, well, corrective exercise complete. So a lot of that, a lot of these don't tell them what to do because you want to see how they automatically move. You might take a person that's like, well, I was a catcher. This is how we squat. Like, I didn't know this is bad. It's bad in your eyes, but it was never bad for me. Right. So, okay. So I'm with you on that one. And that is, cueing them is right. Is you really want to see it. Do they actually lack ability? So now let me, I'm used to having, this is not a debate with you and I, but I'm used to having very contentious debates about this. So I'm used to the common concerns that people have of different levels. So I'll speak practically, I'll speak scientifically. So everybody feels, spoken to. But I would say the two biggest concerns I get, and again, I'm gonna get some specific details with some research challenges, anterior pelvic tilt, and all these types of things. I'm gonna cover it. But again, I want to be a little bit broader at first. So the two big things that people will be concerned with, and these are reasonable, is they'll say, well, so think about this as we get into the challenges. They'll say, well, that research said that wasn't any good or whatever, but all I know is I see it work. My people get better, right? So I'm going to address that. And then the other one is, well, okay, I get it. I'm a trainer, and I get, Nick, you and Rick are telling me to exercise more with people and not be so caught up with telling them they're broken and finding every little problem they have. But what about reinforcing underlying dysfunctions? If I just ignore these things, or if I take the approach I said, where you get them exercising first based on what they can do and work around their aches and pains, and find variations of exercises or progressions and regressions, as some trainers may call it. I just call it variation. That they can do now and build from there. Isn't that ignoring or just, is that going to reinforce these underlying dysfunctions? So that is really going to be the question I'm going to address with some of this research, because what we think have been told are underlying dysfunctions are really more likely just variations of normal and questionable. Mm-hmm. It's questionable to call them a dysfunction to begin with. All right. But let me address the other one first. And it's a simpler way I can deal with it, which is the anecdotal. I've seen it work, and my favorite guru who I learned from, or my favorite physical therapist does posture assessments or so-and-so movement screen, and everybody feels better and they cured leprosy. Right. Yeah. Okay, great. I get it. Nobody's going to say that what you see happening in front of you is wrong. Right? You see people getting better. Here's what I would say to that, though. Most trainers and physical therapists are not just doing a few corrective movements that we may associate with in a NASM book or other things that are of the like. All right. They're also doing general fitness, maybe not as much as we are trying to encourage, but they're still doing it. Right. You're still doing some exercises. And you're also getting people to move more than they were before. You're directing them. They're trusting you. What we don't necessarily know is if we know what we're seeing, but we don't necessarily know if it's for the reasons we're seeing it because of. Maybe it's just because you got them moving more, and you got them moving in a little bit more of a balanced program, and they trusted you. And maybe it's not because you had them do the specific breathing exercise with the balloon, or because you did the one special thing. Maybe it's just you reinstated activity into their life. So hang on a second, my wife. Can you get in?
Yep.
Oh, hang on one sec. My wife, for whatever reason, didn't bring her keys in. Hang on a sec.
No, go for it. And while he's going to go let his wife in the door, let me address some of this. So I agree with some of the questions that people bring up to Nick. So would they say, okay, well, are we going to reinforce bad patterns? And I think that that's a valid question. And the answer to that is it depends on your programming. And that's something that we need to look in, is that, do I need to be a corrective exercise specialist in order to provide good programming and still be able to, can I still instill some of the things that are going to help people feel, function, and move better without corrective exercise? And the answer is yes, because I mean, let's be honest, if you put together good programming, then that programming, whether it's YTAs or floor cobras or Copenhagen planks or all of these, anterior tibialis raises or big toe crunches, all of these have a place. But how much of that is your place? And who is that being done with when they come to you for fitness? And I think some of it is an exercise in our ability to say, look what I've learned and what I can incorporate. And sometimes people can really use that. And a lot of times that can be used in a well-developed strength and conditioning program. So it doesn't necessarily mean set it aside. It means that you can't spend all of this time doing corrective exercises that may be beneficial and not actually implement the exercises that are going to be significantly beneficial. Because at the end of the day, we're going to be like, all right, so, are we helping increase fitness? And that's what we're working at, physical fitness. And the amount of strength in your flexor hallucis longus is potentially important, but not as important as moving the body and doing the work. So can it be supported in this process? So I think corrective exercise has a place and it can be done up front, but it can also be done all throughout the program. And it doesn't all have to be done in the very beginning of the workout. It can be done, as Nick even mentioned earlier, after some sets of resistance training. Now, I like to do a little prep going into it and then do it in between, but there are a lot of questions still to be answered on why are we implementing these things. And I think that's where Nick wants to speak to right now, and then I'll let you go into it, and then I'll follow up with some of the comments that I'd like to make, because there are assumptions, and I think that these are many assumptions that have been around for decades, and the assumptions are indeed assumptions, and we will treat them as if they are dogma, and we have to be careful with that. So, Nick, go ahead. I'll let you pick back up.
I appreciate it. And I'm going to pick back up where I left off. But that's the main thing, is a lot of trainers, when we learn this corrective stuff, we become very arrogant and very confident. You start, you go through the airport and you watch people walk and you go, oh, look at that knee, look at that valgus, look at that hip internal rotation, and everybody's broken. And then you judge other trainers that way. You might see a trainer like myself, who I've been around for a long time, and I know a lot of the research, and I don't do a lot of corrective stuff, but you may look at me and go, well, clearly Nick doesn't know how to assess people. I thought he was supposed to be some good, trainer of the year kind of guy. And maybe it's because I've read all the research and I question it more than you do, versus that I'm ignorant about it. So you see, we get very cocky about it. So anyway, I'll get there. So let's talk about the anecdotal thing. Well, all I know is I see it work, people get better. Great. So I got a lot of things to say about that. I'll try to be as quick as I can. So most trainers are still doing some form of exercise with their clients, even though if it's not as much as we'd like to see. They're still doing a squat here, a kettlebell deadlift there, some core work, even if it's basic planks and bridges. How do you know it's not just because of those? How do you know it's because you did those things in the specific order? How do you know it's because you rolled this and did that? Have you ever tried it without the roller and see if it just works as well? How do you explain that to people who haven't done that and still feel better? Right? How do you explain that your neighbor said, I started doing Pilates and my back problem is great, and your other neighbor says, I started doing Pilates, it killed my back? Right? So, and their research actually validates this. But let's look at the industry now. I'm going to be straightforward. We have a lot of modalities. Some of them make mutually incompatible claims about corrective, right? And I'm not going to sit there and get into names. I don't know if it's going to be a conflict with NASM. I don't know. I'm not going to try to, I want to make sure this gets published. So, but you have some people who say that everything starts with the breathing, right? I know it's the rib and breathing, right? All, if you don't start with the breathing, then everything else is, secondary, right? Some schools of thought make that claim. You have other schools of thought that say, well, because your feet are the first contact with the ground and set up a chain reaction, everything starts with the feet. If you don't start with the feet, then everything up the chain doesn't matter. Well, both can't be right. Both can be wrong. Both can't be right. Right. So here we have practitioners that do all the breathing stuff and say, well, all I know is my people get better. And then you have people that say, well, if you're not starting with the feet, then it's subpar than us, and we're starting with the feet. And guess what? All these people get better. Well, the people who breathe don't do the breathing stuff, don't start with the feet, right?
Right.
Then you have people who do posture assessments, and they say that you have to isolate before you integrate. And then you have people go train movements, not muscle, and then you have to go do movement screens. And because if you train the movements, you'll get the muscles. Well, both those are mutually incompatible, right? But all these people say the same thing. All I know is I see it work and everybody's feeling better, right? Well, as I said, they all can't be right when they make mutually incompatible claims, but they all can be wrong, right? Now, I'm not saying when I say wrong, I don't mean it doesn't work. What I mean is their explanations for why they're seeing people feel better and happier are usually wrong. They think it's because of the little nuanced things that they learned by their favorite instructor that said, oh, whenever I push here, it creates a neuromuscular, and all the $5 words, a proprioceptive neuromuscular response to the fascial system. We love jargon, right? And we all have our own jargon. Maybe it's just because you got them moving in a way they haven't moved before. They trusted you, and you reinstated some activity into their life. And what that shows is that maybe the therapeutic benefits of physical activity aren't as specific to the Shaolin monk techniques that we think we possess. That's the arrogance part of it, I think, is that I want you to be confident in what you do, but we tend to fight each other and go, well, look at that trainer. Well, that trainer's not looking at the feet first. Well, that trainer's not looking at the breathing first. Oh, well, they're still doing posture assessments. Well, don't they know movement assessments? They're doing movement assessments. Well, don't they know you have to isolate? That's the kind of stuff that it gets us all fighting one another and gets us really, back up and arms crossed and dug in the sand and doing it more. And it becomes like politics at the time. And the person who is hurt most by it is the client, right? So we get used by the system instead of us using the system, as you were talking about your 2006 version of you. The textbook was using you. You weren't using the textbook at that point.
That's right.
So I said all that to call into question the I see it work thing. What I'm saying is everybody sees their stuff work. The people that you think, you being the people listening, that you think are full of crap in their methodology because it goes against your methodology, are also saying they see it work. But yet you reject their anecdotal cases, right? So that goes to show a larger truth, that getting the human body moving, trusting the trainer and enjoying it, and just turning on muscles in ways that they probably aren't doing on a regular basis probably works in general. And I'm going to talk about some research that actually validates that well, but it's more than likely not because of the fascial, neural, proprioceptive, whatever things that you learned in the course. Sometimes we get a little heavy on those explanations and we think, well, it's got to be because of that cool explanation because it sounds awesome. And the person teaching me is, got 85 PhDs and they speak in, all over the world. They must be right.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the NASM-CPT Podcast. This is my guest, Nick Tumminello, and I'm happy to have Nick on the show. I want to have a better conversation about what's going on within the fitness industry. And he was speaking to something I think it's important to speak to, like, where does dysfunction start, and what are the approaches? And to be honest, if you go to different universities are going to look at different approaches to whether they're physical therapy or anywhere else, they're going to look at different approaches. So some might have, like you had mentioned, the foot up approach, or some might mention, does it start with the core and then move out from there? Because everything, movement starts at the core. Is it your breathing? Is it, and then there's the biomechanical models and the neuromuscular models, and there's so many different models. And what's interesting to me about the models is that they have a lot of different language and a lot of different speaking points, and they have very similar ways that they actually go about getting answers. And I find it very interesting that they are defiant models when it comes to other ways. And then when you say, okay, well, how do you address that? Well, it might be through movement, it might be through muscle, it might be through nerves, it might be through neuromuscular re-education, and all of these wonderful, wonderful terminologies. And yet, when you look at what they're doing, they're not that dissimilar. And so I think when we really break down kind of where you're coming from is, the movement is the medicine, and that we can create movement, and we can guide movement, and we can support movement. And as we continue to do that, there's a reason I will also say that so many, and this is interesting, and Nick, you probably think so too, like trainers and strength and conditioning coaches all kind of have this, many have this thing where they're like, I kind of also want to be a physical therapist. And physical therapists are more and more moving into the strength and conditioning world. Right. And the reason that they are moving more into the strength and conditioning world is because they find that strength and conditioning does physical therapy almost better than physical therapy does.
And adds other fitness and strength benefits.
And yes, along with the other great benefits that PT doesn't necessarily provide.
Right.
So I think that this is a very important thing as we start to look at corrective exercise. I think the first thing, and really going back to the titular question, which is what is the missing corrective exercise? I think sometimes it's exercise.
Yeah, better foundational training programming, and a little less of the small time. It's a little less foam roller, a little less Ys and Ts, a little bit more squats and lunges and presses in a way that you can do control and comfort. I didn't say don't do it. What I mean is that we've sort of lost our way, because that has a therapeutic benefit. So thank you. So I don't want to stop. If you have anything more to say, I want to start talking about some of the research questions.
So let's get into the research and go into that. I have a phone call I've got to be on in a few minutes. So let's go ahead and dig into some of this. I don't want to cut this short so I can be late to my call, but I want to make sure that we get into some of this research.
Sure. And I will provide, for the folks listening, and Rick, you let me know if you need me to provide like references and want to go check my facts, please do. I always say, don't trust me, test me. I will send you some links to the things, but they can also check out the article. So I'm not going to sit here and go, well, Schmeitberger in 1989 did a study. I'm just going to summarize some stuff, right? To not bore people. Cool. All right. So we have three categories of general corrective exercise. You have motor control exercises. You have movement screens and how much they, apply to as they relate to posture and pain, and then postural dysfunction, or movement dysfunctions, postural dysfunctions, and motor control dysfunctions. So all three of those, have certain claims as they relate to performance and pain, right? So let's talk about the posture one first. I'm going to just throw a few things out there that are spoken as if they are true, but have not really been validated nearly to the level of which they're spoken as accepted as true. Let's cover a few of them. First is anterior pelvic tilt. We generally hear, well, that means that you're more than likely to have back pain, or it could be a cause of your current back pain, and it may make your abdominals weak. So I think we have like 50 studies, more than that have been looking at this since all the way back dating to the 70s. And as far as I know, only 2 of them actually show any correlation between an anterior pelvic tilt and back pain. The rest of like the 48 actually show no direct correlation between anterior pelvic tilt and back pain. For you research nerds out there, I have several systematic reviews meta-analysis, which is a study of studies, because everybody says, oh, you can find a study to support or falsify anything you want. Yeah, we call that cherry picking, otherwise known as BS. You can't cherry pick with a systematic review because it's looking at all the studies of a relevant topic and then say, what do they tell us if we look at them together? And we have at least 2 that I can remember off the top of my head of like meta-analysis, about 50 different studies that say no direct connection between anterior pelvic tilt and back pain or future development of back pain. And this is in men and women and older people and younger people and everybody in between. All right. We have several studies that test abdominal strength on people with an anterior pelvic tilt versus not an anterior pelvic tilt. And none of them show to be any weaker or stronger than neighbors. So that doesn't necessarily correlate. So now I'm going to pause there for a second. I still got a little bit of a rant to go on here, but I've heard of a common argument about that. What people will then say, well, that's true. Okay. Well, pain is very nuanced and it's multifactorial. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So with people that tend to make the posture claim and go, well, that's an anterior pelvic tilt, you've got to be careful, the back pain. That's maybe why they have back pain, or you don't have it now. Well, you will. Right.
So let me just speak to that real quick. And I want to be real careful about anybody within the NASM family.
Yeah, and I'm not saying NASM says any of these things.
No. I'm speaking to this directly, which is I want everyone to be very careful not to fearmonger movement, right? So movement dysfunction, is there are things that we look at that we want to address, but what we don't need to do is fearmonger people. That's not, first of all, it may or may not be true. You may not have any correlation with that whatsoever, just because this means that this will be, right? So whether or not that's, somebody's elevating their shoulders when they do lat pull downs and you're like, oh, that's going to mess your shoulder up. Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't want you doing a lat pull down that way. Like, I want you to be able to depress your shoulders when you do it, but I'm not going to fearmonger you into it. I'm going to give you my idea of what I want that movement to look like. Same thing with valgus and all of these other things. So I want to address that. Secondly, for our NASM corrective exercise specialists, we do not address pain. Personal trainers do not address pain. Corrective exercise specialists do not address pain. That's not what we do. In fact, many times we try to avoid pain. Now, we can address movement, and if addressing that movement then addresses the pain, then we'd be like, oh, amazingly, there was a correlation there. But just because you address movement doesn't mean it's going to mitigate, solve, or address anything having to do with that pain, because it may have nothing to do with why they're experiencing pain. So I'm going to take what you just said and get on my soapbox that I know a lot of people within our circle here with NASM will do. And so I want to address that from the NASM perspective. Listen, we're not seeking to treat pain. We're not trying to treat pain. That is not who we are, nor is it what we do. All right. That being said, Nick, go on about your business.
For sure, man. And I'll speak from the real world perspective. And again, I won't say anything that contradicts what you say, but I also know as a trainer, a lot of people feel like they're victims of the medical system, and they're going to trainers because they have pain, because they feel like they've not been handled properly with the medical system. So they're seeking a more holistic approach. So again, we're not making any diagnosis, but we say, hey, maybe if I stretch this and strengthen this or get you moving, maybe it will help. But you're not necessarily trying to play physio. So, but I'm just speaking to the trainers from the real world free market, knowing sure as heck that people are coming to us a lot of times specifically because they have issue, and we're not going to turn down money. We got rent to pay and mortgages to pay. So, okay, but it's how we go about it, how we communicate it, which you did a great job clarifying. Okay, so now back to some of these. So one more about posture, and then I'll move on to movement, and then I'll move on to motor control. So what about upper cross syndrome? That's forward shoulders, forward head posture, right? Now, we do know like extreme postures like this, like folded up like a question mark. There's some research that shows that definitely that has a pretty good correlation with pain. But some of these general, just a little forward shoulder types, the things that you see more typically in everyday people, right? There was a really good study done. Well, actually, I'll talk about 2 studies now about scapular mechanics and, tight pecs and lats and all that kind of stuff. They actually did a stretching and strengthening program. They stretched the pecs. I think they stretched the lats. They strengthened the mid-scapular muscles. And they looked at range of motion or they looked at posture, right? And they looked at range of motion. And what they found is that after the stretching what's in front and strengthening what's in the back, they found that scapular mechanics, when the arm was moving, was better. Shoulder range of motion this was not about pain. Shoulder range of motion was better. General overall strength was better. Everything that you could ask for improved, but static posture didn't change. Because posture is habitual. Posture is not necessarily something so basically when they moved, the scapula moved better.
Yeah, gotcha.
Right? But if you're just chasing this to change, you may be chasing a ghost. Now, okay, some people go, oh, well, it's just a consciousness thing. We see these before and after pictures. Posture. It's like, well, yeah, the person just was more aware, but they're probably not comfortable sitting like that, right? So let me give you a more real world example that we can all relate to if I'm losing you with the science stuff. We've all seen men's gymnastics, right? And you watch the guys and they do the rings. They've got these incredible bodies, and clearly they have amazing shoulder mobility and stability because they're swinging around. Their arms sometimes are behind their back, where the ring is that way. They're hanging from it. You cannot tell me this dude has got dysfunctional shoulders, right? The things that he's been doing and the mobility they've had. When they land, they address the audience, and then as soon as they walk off stage, they're like this, right? You watch them sitting there like this. That's because the dude has got such huge biceps and huge lats that this is just his resting posture. But just because he has this posture doesn't mean he can't get there to these positions when he needs to, all right? Which speaks a little bit more to the movement than the posture thing. So I can give you some other examples of this, but there was another study. It's a meta-analysis looking at neck and shoulder pain with forward shoulder and head posture. And what it found was that there was no connection. They looked at some people without, I think it was looked at over a certain amount of years. It was a meta-analysis. And they said, do people with this sort of posture have more head and neck and shoulder pain than people who don't have that posture? And they found no more people with this posture, out of the group had more pain than people who didn't necessarily have it. And we see the same thing with people with so-called pelvic malalignments, right? Like people who have a less anterior pelvic tilt tend to not have any more pain than people who have an anterior pelvic tilt over time as well. That's another flaw with that, with some of the claims that we think. And this has been looked at numerous times, like back to the 70s. It's not one study. This is over and over and over and over again. The problem we don't hear about it a lot is because trainers actually don't like to look at research. They like to read books, and they read books by people who aren't actually reading research. And they're reading books about people who learn from their teacher, and it's the phone game. They're just repeating it. But nobody ever went and looked at the claim and went, what's the counter evidence to this? How could this be wrong? Right? That's a, social psychology thing. So anyway, what they found is that the only thing this was connected to was a lack of shoulder range of motion, right? So if you're like this, you're not going to get your arms up as high over. So if you want full mobility, good. Go ahead and do your range of motion type stuff. But we can't necessarily say that a slightly more forward shoulder is dysfunctional. Okay. Now, I got a lot to talk about. I know you're quick, so I got to keep this moving. But the reason why I'm bringing this up again is not to be interpreted as saying everything that the NASM textbook says is wrong, or your favorite, corrective person, whoever you may have learned from, is wrong. What's to say is that you don't have to worry so much about reinforcing dysfunction with doing good training, because most of the research questions what we think or have been told as dysfunctions may not be, right? So the explanation is these are more than likely just variations of normal. So maybe the standard plumb line posture that we've all been shown since the 50s, Kendall, which I'm going to talk about in a second, maybe is a little too rigid. In fact, and I credit my friend Charlie McMillan for this. He's gone back in history and he has the first edition of Muscles Testing and Function, which is where all the plumb line posture assessments come from. And that was done in Annapolis, Maryland. I happen to be from Maryland. And they looked at several hundred kids that were all in the Naval Academy. And do you know, not one kid, not one person, I think they were high school kids or people in the Naval Academy, whatever ages, not one person fit their optimal model with that plumb line. They even have that in their book. Interesting, in their first edition. Guess what happened? Because that clicked and that went on, and every chiropractor started using that plumb line, every physical therapist, and then trainers. Because that took off and nobody really cared about that part where they said, we just thought this was ideal, but we never found a single person to fit it. They took it, it was taken out by the publisher in the second edition and on prior. And it's still to this day the basis for what most posture schools of thought go to as a judge of where are they based on optimal, except it was a test that nobody could ever pass in the beginning. All right. So again, is it a nice model to use as a reference point? Sure. But if we say, oh my God, I have to stop the presses and I can't make you do pushing and pulling and legs. I meant stop the presses in a figure of speech, not actually stop the presses. Right. I have to stop fitness because otherwise I'm going to stack it on dysfunction. Well, I'm calling into question what we've been told identifies dysfunction in the first place.
Yeah. So let me speak to that also real quick. Is that I was in a presentation. I was doing a presentation in Serbia, and one of the guys came up to me, as professor at the university, and he was saying a similar thing with squat and looking at lines when it comes to squats. And I think really what I wanted to reinforce with him is that we really are trying to have this idea of a reference point, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a reference point. So this is what we will reference as neutral this or neutral that. And I think one of the examples that I had given was with you. It's kind of like the recommended daily allowance of micronutrients. You eat 2,000 calories of all fruits and vegetables, and you get your meat in, and at the end of the day, you have never reached every single one of your recommended daily allowances for your your B12 and your thiamine and you have this whole list of things, because it's a recommended daily allowance that without supplementation is almost impossible to actually hit. So what is it? It's a reference. It's a reference. And I think that we need to be aware of that. And one of the things that we talk about less in corrective exercise, and again, more in performance, is something we refer to as a performance bandwidth. And your performance bandwidth will change based on the practitioner. I've had this conversation on the podcast before, which is a performance bandwidth is really how much do your feet turn out and knees turn in before you say, let's make a comment about that. Let's address it. How much do you see instability when you watch people run versus watching people run with less ability? How much forward head do you see before you go, give me a little retraction in the neck? And then identifying that, and those are both cues and potential ways of helping reinforce what we would refer to as good form or good technique. But being able to do this in the realm of exercise, making sure people are still working at being fit versus working at trying to reinforce a movement pattern that, as we're having a conversation here, is what we would look at and say, this is ideal, this is optimal, and yet it is rare that anybody is actually going to achieve it. So at what point is it the standard? And I think we need to have standards. We need to have something to aim towards, but it doesn't make it wrong. And we love to make it wrong. And I'll leave it to you guys as corrective exercise practitioners, performance enhancement, and personal trainers, where you use performance bandwidth of your own and say, okay, I like this movement. I see a few little things, but at the end of the day, I think that you look really good. So we're just going to keep working out. We're going to keep exercising. And then when you see things where you're like, there's something that I may want to address, you don't have to spend 15 minutes at the beginning of a workout just addressing that issue. That can be addressed through small movements and through integration and activations and these other things that we talked about while they're actually in between, where it's part of their active rest. All right. So Nick, go ahead. I'm going to let you keep nailing down some of these ideas and concepts, and let me do a little follow up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So, and like I said, when I say to call it into question is not this binary, well, that means what I've been taught is nonsense and, what's going on? I'm confused. I'm in the NASM podcast and Nick is saying things that are against the NASM book. No, what I'm saying is that when we learn a lot of these corrective techniques, it's not that they're wrong, is that we become scared to often do our job. I'm not saying this is what NASM teaches. What I'm saying is how trainers often interpret it. Yeah. All right. So, and what I'm saying is that, and then we get scared and we go, well, this person's very dysfunctional. Their posture's bad. Their movement's bad. And so how can I justify giving them a good workout program like you and Rick are talking about here? Because I'm just going to keep reinforcing dysfunction. Therefore, I may open them up for more aches and pains and problems. What I'm saying is you don't have to worry about that so much, because a lot of the research that's come out, and it is a lot, calls into question that these things definitely mean problems. So if we can now sit back and go, wait a minute, just because the person's got a little forward shoulder or a little, extra arch in their back, the lordotic curve, maybe that doesn't mean they got a problem that I have to stop doing everything until I fix that. First off, I may never fix it, right? Based on one of the studies I told you about. Secondly, it doesn't necessarily mean they're weak here and tight here. Third, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the cause of their pain or that's going to give them pain. So if that's not this major problem, sure, do I think it might be important to address it and give them a hip flexor stretch here and to give them a little glute strengthening here? Good. Now we're back to good programming again. Right. It just means that you don't have to be scared away from doing just some rows and allowing some variance in their form without just making it look totally terrible, right? So, and not be fearful that just giving them a good strength program and not just doing the corrective and following the NASM manual, that you don't have to be fearful that is giving them a lesser service or that you're ignoring something. That's the issue. And now it comes down to the fact that training shouldn't be this thing that your client either feels good about, but the trainer doesn't feel good about, right? It's fun and ass kicking, but the trainer says it's not corrective enough and not specific enough to deal with your imbalances. But on the flip side, we say, well, don't get too crazy with the correct, but they need it. It's not just about making the client feel good. What we're saying is both can feel good. You, the trainer, can do it with a program like we've been talking about.
Can exist at the same time.
Correct. What I'm saying is you don't have to be scared of reinforcing dysfunction, because what we think may have been told dysfunction is maybe just a variation of normal. Again, I'm repeating that over and over. Now, let's talk about movement screens for a second. There has been no good studies, right? There's been a lot of studies, right? So when I say good studies, I mean ones that have a decent subject pool, right? That show that somebody's performance in a movement screen with a certain score, cutoff score, is connected to performance, right? We know that's been talked about for a while. Then we thought, well, maybe it wasn't connected with better performance, but it was connected with higher chance of injury. More research has come out looking at injury risk relative to certain cutoff scores, and they have found no connection between a lower cutoff score and a higher chance of injury. Now, to the credit, some of the people selling these screens have been open with saying this, and they try to play with their words a little bit. They say, well, it's more about durability than injury prevention.
Right.
Okay, it's up to resilience. To me, I get it. They're trying to be intellectually honest, but to me, I'm like, well, if it's not helping with reduce the risk of injury and it's not helping me run faster, jump higher, perform better, then why do I care? But again, maybe you use it as a baseline to compare them to themselves, right? So maybe you have your other reasons. Maybe you're a coach and you want everybody tested to see where they started from. Fine. Again, the takeaway here is just don't use that as a way to make people think that they're broken and therefore need to be fixed. That takes you away from training, thinking that, well, this shows dysfunctions that will reduce performance or increase injury risk. Those things have not been validated, right? So again, we don't have to be paranoid about not letting people train because of results there. Last one to bring all this around is motor control. So one of the big problems, one of the counter arguments I deal with a lot about this is they say, oh, well, yeah, in your research, they're not putting people in subgroups, right? Not all pain is the same, not all injury is the same, right? So you can't just take a group of people with back pain and then say, well, not some of them with the pelvic tilt had it and other ones didn't, so therefore it's not connected. But if you subgrouped them, with pain related to this movement and pain not related to, then you would see these connections. Okay, well, that research has been done too. So what they've done is they've taken back pain people and they've subgrouped them into what, and this is, by the way, all done by high-end physical therapists who specialize in this stuff with doing the interventions. So, for example, they looked at one that was they were assessed first by physical therapists, and physical therapists subgrouped them and say, okay, this one has a motor control dysfunction, which really just sort of means like a neuromuscular timing issue. Mm-hmm. And then they split that group up. So this was in back pain people now. And they gave them, one group did specific motor control exercises like TVA activation and multifidus activation and all that. I'm not saying that's exactly what they did. I'm just using examples of what trainers know and say, oh, that's what Nick means by motor control exercise. It means just not like strengthening by doing lots of planks. It's more like detailed timing and movement things. So controlling unwanted movement, that kind of stuff. Guess what the other group did? So this was a split. It was like a blind, one group got the motor control training. The other group got general exercise. General exercise in this study was riding a recumbent bike, right? I think it was 20 minutes or 30 minutes 3 times a week. So the timing that each group exercise was the same. So it was 2 or 3 times. Don't hold me to the exact details of the study, but the overall aspect, right? So everybody was subgrouped. Those 2 subgroups were divided into 2 groups. They got the same amount of exercise time. One group got the specific corrective motor control exercise. The other group was on the bike and just riding at a regular pace. At the end of the study, this is back pain people, subgrouped. Who got better? Everybody.
Everybody, yeah.
Everybody. Nobody had better results than the other one. Now, even in the research, what they said is that this probably shows that that you don't necessarily need to be as specific as we think to get people better. So this shouldn't call in. This says a lot here, and this brings all this around.
Yeah.
Now imagine if these 2, one person was your neighbor who was in the bike group, and one person was your neighbor who was in the motor control group. What is the person who did the motor control group going to say is best for their back pain? They're going to go, no, you got to do what I did. You got to do this specific Pilates, series or specific motor control, whatever they did. And that's what you have to do. Right. But the person who did the biking is going to go, all I know is I just got on the bike. Right. So that speaks to anecdote. What they don't know is what if the other one did the other thing? So you always got to be real quick. You got to be conscious of what you see, tying back to my initial point. And this whole, well, I know what I see works. Yeah, but you don't know why. And you don't know if something would have worked equally as well or better for that specific thing, in making people feel better and move better while also getting them those guns that they want. That's the point about getting them exercising more, or those buns that they want. So that really wants to tie this together. This should be freeing to trainers. It should tell us that we don't have to be so crazy about the magic order and the Shaolin monk techniques and looking, oh, my God, that is weak and it's tight. And we can't press because your shoulders are slightly forward. We only have to do rows and we have to do, no, not necessarily, or their neck hurts a little bit. Well, that's probably because their shoulders like this. Maybe not. Maybe they've been dealing with that since they've been a kid. Maybe it's hormonal. Maybe it's how they slept. So I'm not saying it doesn't count to anybody. But again, further in, start with regular exercise first. And if those issues still persist, now you start going further in. Let me look at that shoulder a little bit. Yeah, maybe that is elevating a little bit. Now you start to play with it. But we don't have to be afraid to start with exercise. And we don't have to think that we're reinforcing dysfunction.
Oh, man. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's been an eye-opening conversation as I've had with Nick throughout the years on multiple occasions. So I'm glad you got a chance to hear him talk. And I think that one of the things that I want to be very clear about is that there are a lot of things out there that work. And what I love and appreciate about NASM is that there is a system to implement it, which kind of takes away people just going, I don't know, let's just do exercises at will. And I think that that's um, first of all, terrible programming. That is not programming. That's just doing exercises. And the the quality of your programming and the quality of the selection and implementation of exercises are important, but how you do them, how you put them together. But so many times, the answer to so many people is to get them moving. And I talk about this so much on the show when it comes to making sure that we get people moving. And I've, I went through a big sedentary behaviors phase in this podcast. So those who've been listening for a while have heard me talk about over and over again the dangers of sedentary behaviors. So I think when you get people, the last thing that you want them to do is rolling around sometimes on the floor with a foam roller and doing stretches, when the last thing they need to do, especially if they're uncomfortable, is getting down on the floor at all. So there is nuance, and some of the nuance is very beneficial, and some of it is in your ability to work with an individual. This is the art that goes along with the science, how you are creative, because creativity makes training more fun, and making training more fun gets people more involved in the training, giving people an opportunity to help program their workout. And even if they pick an exercise that may not be the greatest exercise for them in your program, if it helps support them feeling like they're a part of it, then is it wrong to implement it? And so there are a lot of things that I want us to think about when it gets to the point where we're trying to help support people. And one of the ways that I explain this is kind of like, it's kind of like learning how to write. When you learn how to write, there are very specific rules. Everything starts with a capital letter, and then they end with an exclamation point, a question mark, or a period. Right? But as you progress and you become a better and more prolific writer, then all of a sudden there are other little things that pop up, like colons and semicolons and commas and dashes and ellipses. And then, run-on sentences are wrong. But when you get somebody that's a good writer, when they put a run-on sentence in there, it is for a reason. But are you the author who can put that down and make that make sense? And so we give people the leeway, like here are the rails that keep the bowling ball from going into the gutter, and then eventually you take the rails off and almost remove some of the gutters, because we want people to then, you're getting so comfortable with how you develop programs and how you work with people that you are implementing what you see. I wouldn't say clinically, but I would say practically, the people that you work with and how they engage with you, and then the people, the science that we know, right? And there's science that's out there that we don't know. And so it's good to have things brought up to us that we need to consider. Now, these are all things that I'm familiar with and I know about, but it might not be things that you are that familiar with. So shout out to my friend Nick Tumminello to come on the podcast and to really shed some light on some things that I don't think we necessarily consider. Right. And so we consider it, and then like all the writing people and all the educators at NASM, and we have these conversations. And a lot of times we say, well, what are the guardrails that we wouldn't put on? But at the end of the day, we get these conversations that also come out and go, well, what about this research? And what about this research? So there are the guardrails. And then as you start to become a better programmer, a better craftsman of what it is that you're doing, then you develop and you decide what goes in, what goes out, and how to go about working with your clients in the way that helps support them most effectively. So with that being said, shout out to Nick. Nick, if you can give people, whether it's your social media, where you got a website, things like that, how people can contact you, and then I will sign us off.
Yeah, man. Well, first off, credit to you and NASM for having me on, and it shows me that you know it's not about who's right. That's why I don't like all this disagree. You know, oh my God, who's right? I don't know who to believe. No, it's about getting closer to the truth. And there's a lot of things that work, and it shows that you know at NASM care about getting people the best info, and you want to hear different. You don't just have an echo chamber. So I really do appreciate that. It says a lot about NASM, and I hope we can do more work together for the betterment of the people around us, right? So that being said, just self-promotion, Nick Tumminello. You can see how my name is spelled there on the screen. Instagram, I always joke, I say Google knows me, but Instagram is just my name. Facebook is my name. I'm actually pretty active on my my personal Facebook. I tend to put more, things on good thoughts about training. It's all very training related. My YouTube is Trainer of Trainers, but if you search Nick Tumminello, you'll find it. And I have some online courses. Program design is my specialty, so you can just check those out on the website.
Very good. All right. Thank you very much, Nick. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to the NASM-CPT podcast. If you got questions for me, hit me up. You can reach out to me on Instagram at dr.rickrichey or email me rick.richey@nasm.org. Y'all keep inspiring people to fitness. Like, subscribe, share with your fitness friends and family. Thank you so much for listening. This has been the NASM-CPT podcast.